So this is where we left off last time. With the drawing completed, you can still see some of the shapes that we used to construct this character. So what we're going to do is transfer this to a clean sheet of paper. One of the best, quickest methods that I've found for doing this, especially if you don't have a light table, is to get a clean sheet of paper, turn the drawing upside down on it like this, and you can just barely see where the drawing is on the back side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all of the areas where the lines are and put it fairly dark. I'm using the side of the pencil. And I'm just going to go all the way around. The only areas that I'm really concerned with are where the lines are on the other side of the paper. So I'm just going to go over all of these lines. And again, I'm looking through the back side of the paper and only concerning myself with areas where there's pencil on the other side. It's not necessary to do the entire back side of the drawing because I'm not going to be using the entire back side, just where the lines are. You don't have to be super concerned with how neat this is, but it is a good idea to try and make it as dense as possible with regards to the marks on the paper, so that any place where there is a line on the other side of the paper is covered. And again, I'm not being super careful. As long as I cover up where the line is, I'll be fine. This is called the transfer method. You can also trace it, assuming there's nothing on the back side of the paper. On some of our exercises in some of my classes, we did a drawing on the back side of this when we practiced drawing just the face and the head. So now that I've got it completely covered, I can turn it over, and you can see that one of the things that happened to this was it's very faint, but you can see that it actually transferred some of the drawing on this side from the pressure of laying it over and tracing over it. We're going to use that same thing to our advantage now. I flipped that other piece of paper over. I'm going to put these two down, one on top of the other. And all I'm going to do is, using a red pen, or any pen for that matter, I'm just going to go over all of the lines. And the reason I use a red pen is so that I can see where I've been. I'm just going to trace all the way around by applying pressure. What this is doing is, every place on the back side of this piece of paper where I've scribbled, it's transferring the lead or the graphite from the back of here to the front of there. So you can see that. It's going to transfer that so that I can ink it later. The nice thing about this method is I can be as careful as I need to be in redrawing over this, and then I don't have to worry about erasing any of this stuff. So rather than making you wait through the tedium of watching me draw this entire thing with a red pen, I'm going to pause the video until I've done the rest of the transfer process, and then we'll get to the next stage, which is the inking process. The nice thing about using a red pen, as I said, is that you can see where you've drawn. The other thing about the red pen is that even if it doesn't completely draw, you can lift the paper every so often. Notice how I'm holding it down here. you can lift the paper every so often and just sort of flip the drawing up to see where you may have missed. I noticed on this side, after I started the video again, that I wanted to add his ankle, and then I forgot to do his toenails. So again, this method of flipping the page to see the drawing underneath is very similar to the method that animators use when they're doing frame-by-frame animation drawing. So now that I've got my lines on here, you can still just barely see in some places where the pencil might not have gone down as hard or with as much pressure. But I'm okay with that because I can see most of what I need to see. Even over here on the ankle, where you can just barely see it, I'm not super concerned about that. So I'm just using a Uniball Vision Elite gel pen. And I kind of like the way the ink flows on these. But what all I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over all the lines, very carefully this time. And if there are details that I need to add or details that I need to leave out, I can do that at this point. So for instance, I don't want to carry that line all the way up here because this is part of his beard. I'm just going to go all the way around where I've already drawn and just cover up those lines. Again, you can make slight adjustments as you go around. So this drawing is for all of the students who were either not here for a portion of the class time, or, as is the case with a few of my students, after the first of the year, their parents decided to take an extended vacation or some other type of family emergency or anything like that. And so several of my students were not here, so now they can have the benefit of seeing what we've been doing for the past 2 weeks in class. So again, I'm going to pause the video as I go around the rest of this. And then when I've done inking the first time through, I'm going to show you how to finish off this drawing and add some more embellishments. Okay, so I've gone around one time on this. This is what I would call the first inking. We're going to do 2 inkings on this. And the reason we're doing 2 inkings is because in order for the drawings to look a little more professional, if you will, or a little more polished, we're going to add a thicker line around most of it so that it ends up looking like a coloring book. This is an example of one of the earlier ones I did, and you can see the thicker lines. And it just has a little more polished look to it. So all I'm going to do is, starting over here on this side, I'm going to just start thickening in the lines. And all I'm doing is I'm drawing lines next to each other, and I'm making it about 3 or 4 lines thick on this side. On all of what would be considered the interior lines, I'm going to double them up just so that they're a little bit thicker, but not as thick as the outside. So I'm essentially going to go around the entire thing and thicken up the lines like this. And every time it crosses over into what I'm calling the interior lines, I'm going to do them just slightly thinner. The other thing I'm going to do is, on the top, and left side of the drawing, over here, I'm going to do the lines a little bit thinner than over here. And what that does is it adds the illusion of actually having a shadow. And it'll make more sense as I go along. But again, I'm just doubling up and tripling up and going all the way around the drawing. Try and be as careful as possible and not go too far out. Just try and go right outside the line and do this all the way around. Want it nice and thick on this side. On the top side, as I said, I'm only going to do 2 or 3 lines, just so that it's thicker than it currently is, than just a single line. And not as thick as over here. And once again, we do this because it gives the illusion of shadow without actually cross-hatching or adding pencil. And we'll get into cross-hatching a little bit later. So as I come around to this side where there would be shadow, assuming that the light is coming from this direction, all of these lines on top are slightly thinner. The other nice thing that this does is it allows me to clean up any mistakes I make as I go. What I mean by that is if I'm not super careful, I can sharpen them up, smooth things out, add little details as I go along. So again, every time it comes around to the bottom or the left-hand side, I'm going just a little bit thicker. We'll say 2 to 4 times thicker, as opposed to just twice as thick. Once again, I'm going to pause the video because this is going to take me about 20 minutes or so to do this. This is actually his brow. This isn't a piece of hair right here. He's got a massive brow. So I'm going to bring this line around here, thicken it up here. And you can sort of see how his brow comes around here underneath his eye, the hair on his eyebrow, and down under here where it's thicker. So I'm going to pause the video for a couple of minutes and we'll be back in a few. Let me jump in here and show something very quickly that I also do. If you notice, I changed the line here on his back because I didn't like the way it dipped here from his back up to his shoulder. The other thing is, and this seems to make sense, but if you don't think about it, it won't. And that is, it's okay to move your paper around. Don't feel the need to draw with the paper facing just one direction. Especially on areas that are curved, it's a whole lot simpler to turn the paper around as you go than it is to try and ink it with the paper just in one orientation. So I move the paper around quite a bit. One other thing that you might consider doing, depending on how much pencil transferred from one to the other, is to put a clean sheet of paper down underneath your hand like this. If there's anything on your hand here, it's going to transfer to here. So I've actually kept it fairly clean. I'm not going to do that for now. It's just a good practice to get into, particularly when you're doing any sort of shading. People that airbrush call that a shield. It's basically shielding your artwork from any sort of overspray, or in this case, any sort of smudging. So again, I'm keeping the lines fairly consistent, thickness-wise. Every so often I make a mistake like I just did there, but I'm not going to be overly concerned about it. So again, I'm going to pause the video here and come back in a couple minutes. So, now that I've got everything inked, I want you to just take a few notes. It's really fat down here. Some of the interior lines, even though they're not as thin as they were, if you compare the iris of his eye, that's one thickness of the line. Virtually every place else, I've doubled up or tripled up in some cases the lines, particularly in areas where there would normally be shadow. Note also that on occasion, like up here on his hair, I made it really thick where it's coming out of his head and then thinner as it comes this way, because this is underneath where the hair goes over his forehead. So there's shadow here, comes around, and it gets lighter as it goes down here. So the last two things I want to do on this, you might want to wait a little while before you do this, but you can see some of the decisions I made along the way. I changed the back here and here. I changed the tunic or the shirt a little bit here. And then there was another piece of hair or something here. I changed where the hair comes over the top of his ear. So wait for it to dry completely before you start erasing. And when you erase, don't go really hard on the erasing because you don't want to smudge anything, but just sort of gently remove all of the transferred graphite from when we transferred the image from the previous drawing. Then the very last thing you're going to do on this is you're going to do a horizon line, because right now he looks like he's floating in space. He's got the wheel here, and you know that this is down obviously because this is where his feet are, but I'm just going to put a horizon line here and then follow it over here. And then I'm going to do a really super basic scene. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and do maybe a volcano, and then another mountain over here. If you have room down here because you drew it too shallow, because you have the guy further up, maybe draw some shrubs or something down here. Just some grass, maybe some rocks. If you want to draw a little lizard or a miniature dinosaur or something like that. Up here in the sky, if you want to do some M-birds. I think that's a funny thing too, but I'm going to actually have the volcano exploding. So I'm just going to do some lines coming off the top like this, and then do some clouds around it, and maybe have some pieces coming out, showering down from the volcano. And then finally, just like everything else, I'm going to come in and do an inking on those lines that I just added. So here's the horizon line, this part of the volcano. It's okay to leave this line a little bit lighter, because what naturally happens in a scene like this is that the further away something is, the less detail it has. So if you want to do more detail If you want to do slightly heavier lines, you can. But the background does not have to be that detailed. I'm just going to do more rounded rocks here. Put my M-birds in. You can do your M-birds a little bit thicker if you want. Completely optional. And then do the clouds. That are coming out of the volcano. Draw the rocks down here on the ground. A little bit of grass. And then don't forget the most important thing. Make sure to put your name on it somewhere. I'm going to do my little logo. And then put the year that you did it. And that's it. All I've got to do left is to erase some of the pencil lines. I'm going to wait for it to dry a little bit more before I do that. And this is the assignment.